about consort kidnapping, the utterly shocking practice of abducting women to serve as imperial concubines. Yeah, you heard that right. This isn't some far-fetched plot from a historical drama series. This was real life for countless women in ancient China. Picture this. You're a young woman living in a small village, minding your own business, when suddenly, bam, you're snatched away in the dead of night by imperial agents. Your whole world is turned upside down in an instant. One minute you're dreaming of marrying the boy next door. The next you're being whisked away to become the plaything of an emperor you've never even seen. Talk about a change of plans, huh? Now I know what you're thinking. Surely this can't be true. How could something so barbaric happen? Well, let me tell you. It not only happened, but it was an established practice for centuries. The Tang dynasty, which ruled China from 618 to 907 CE, was particularly notorious for this. Emperor Xuanzong, who reigned from 712 to 756 CE, was said to have had thousands of concubines in his harem. And where do you think all those women came from? That's right, many were kidnapped from their homes and families. But hold on to your hats, because it gets even crazier. These weren't just random abductions. Oh no, the imperial court had a whole system set up for this. They would send out beauty scouts to scour the countryside looking for the most attractive young women. Can you imagine that job? What do you do for a living? Oh, I just travel around kidnapping pretty girls for the emperor. Talk about a conversation stopper at parties. And let me tell you, these scouts were ruthless. They didn't care if a girl was already engaged or even married. If she caught their eye, she was fair game. There are accounts of brides being snatched away on their wedding day, still in their bridal gowns. I mean, come on. Talk about the ultimate wedding crashers. But wait, it gets even more twisted. You see, being chosen as an imperial consort wasn't just about looks. These women had to be perfect in every way. They underwent rigorous physical examinations to ensure they were free from any blemishes or deformities. And I'm not just talking about visible ones. These examinations were, let's just say, very thorough. Wink, wink. And if you think that's bad, just wait until you hear about the training these women had to go through. Once they were brought to the palace, they were put through a grueling regimen to prepare them for life as an imperial consort. They had to learn all sorts of skills, from music and dance to literature and calligraphy. And of course, they had to be schooled in the fine art of pleasing the emperor. Yeah, you can use your imagination on that one. But here's the kicker. After all that, most of these women would never even meet the emperor. That's right, you heard me. The imperial harem was so vast that the majority of consorts would live out their entire lives in the palace without ever catching a glimpse of the man they were supposedly there to serve. Talk about a letdown, am I right? Now, you might be wondering, what about their families? Didn't anyone try to stop this? Well, sure, some families did try to resist. But what could they do against the might of the imperial court? In fact, many families saw having a daughter chosen as a consort as a great honor. It could elevate their social status and bring wealth and privileges. Can you believe that? Selling out your own daughter for a shot at the big time. Talk about family values. But let's take a moment to really think about what this meant for these women. Imagine being torn away from everything and everyone you've ever known, thrust into a world of cutthroat politics and intrigue, where one wrong move could mean death. These women weren't just concubines. They were prisoners in gilded cages, and the psychological toll must have been immense. Many of these women were just teenagers when they were taken. They spent their youth and beauty locked away in the palace, their dreams of love and family crushed. And for what? The slim chance that they might catch the emperor's eye and bear him a child? Talk about a raw deal. But oh boy, if they did manage to bear an imperial child, that's when things really got interesting. You see, in imperial China, the position of empress was often determined by who gave birth to the heir. So if a consort had a son, suddenly she was in the running for the top job. Can you imagine the pressure? It wasn't just about pleasing the emperor anymore. It was a full-on battle royale for power and influence. And let me tell you, these women could be absolutely ruthless in their quest for power. There are stories of consorts poisoning each other's children, spreading vicious rumors, and even resorting to black magic to gain an edge. It was like a real-life Game of Thrones, only with less dragons and more eunuchs. Speaking of eunuchs, let's talk about them for a second. These guys were everywhere in the Imperial palace, and they played a huge role in the lives of the consorts. They were the eyes and ears of the emperor, reporting back on everything that went on in the harem. But they could also be powerful allies for ambitious consorts. Many a eunuch got rich by playing favorites and manipulating the system. Now you might be thinking, surely this couldn't have gone on for that long, right? Wrong. This practice continued well into the Qing dynasty, which ruled China from 1644 to 1912. That's right, folks. We're talking about kidnapping women to be imperial consorts well into the modern era. It's mind-boggling to think that while the rest of the world was going through the Industrial Revolution, China was still snatching up women for the emperor's harem. But let's zoom in on one particular case that really highlights the brutality of this system. In 1654, the Shunji emperor of the Qing dynasty became infatuated with a young woman named Dong Xiaowan. Now Dong was already married to a scholar named Mao Xiang. But did that stop the emperor? Hell no. He had Dong kidnapped and brought to the palace, where she was forced to become his concubine. Can you imagine how Mao must have felt? One day you're happily married, the next your wife is stolen away by the most powerful man in the country, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Talk about feeling powerless. But here's where it gets really tragic. Dong was deeply in love with her husband and couldn't bear the thought of being separated from him. She refused to eat or drink, essentially going on a hunger strike. And guess what? It worked. The emperor was so moved by her devotion that he allowed her to return to her husband. Now, you might be thinking this is a happy ending. But oh no, my friends. This is Imperial China we're talking about. There are no happy endings here. You see, Dong's act of defiance had humiliated the emperor. And in Imperial China, humiliating the emperor was basically a death sentence. Sure enough, not long after Dong returned home, she and her husband were found dead. The official story was that they had committed suicide together out of guilt for offending the emperor. But come on, we all know what really happened. This was a classic case of suicide by emperor. The message was clear. No one, not even the most devoted couple, could stand in the way of the emperor's desires. But let's pull back for a second and look at the bigger picture. This practice of consort kidnapping wasn't just a series of individual tragedies. It had far-reaching effects on Chinese society as a whole. For one thing, it reinforced the idea that women were essentially property, to be bought, sold, or stolen at will. It also contributed to a culture of corruption, where local officials would use their power to procure women for the imperial court in exchange for favors and promotions. And let's not forget the impact on the imperial court itself. With so many women vying for the emperor's attention, the palace became a hotbed of intrigue and backstabbing. Consorts would form alliances, plot against each other, and use every trick in the book to gain an advantage. It was like a never-ending soap opera, only with real lives at stake. But perhaps the most insidious effect was how it warped the emperor's view of women and relationships. When you have thousands of women at your disposal, each one desperate to please you, it's easy to lose touch with reality. Many emperors became completely detached from the real world, living in a fantasy land of endless pleasure and adoration. Take the Xuanye emperor, for example. This guy was so obsessed with his harem that he neglected his duties as ruler. He spent most of his time composing poetry for his favorite consorts and staging elaborate pageants in the palace. Meanwhile, the country was falling apart around him. Talk about fiddling while Rome burns. But here's the real kicker. Despite all the women at their disposal, many emperors were profoundly unhappy. They were surrounded by beauty and luxury, but they were also prisoners of their own power. They could never be sure if anyone truly loved them for themselves, or if it was all just an act to gain favor. It's enough to make you almost feel sorry for them. Almost. Now I know what you're thinking. Surely someone must have spoken out against this practice, right? Well, you'd be right. There were indeed some brave souls who dared to criticize the system. One of the most famous was the scholar Huang Zongxi, who lived during the Ming Dynasty. Huang wrote a scathing critique of the imperial system, including the practice of consort kidnapping. He argued that it was not only morally wrong, but also bad for the country. He pointed out that by taking the most beautiful and talented women from all over China, the imperial court was depriving local communities of their best and brightest. It was like a brain drain, but for beauty and talent. But did anyone listen to Huang? Of course not. Speaking out against the emperor was a quick way to lose your head in imperial China. Huang was lucky to escape with his life, and his works were banned for centuries. And let's not forget about the countless women who resisted in their own ways. There are stories of women who, like Dong Xiaowan, refused to eat or drink when they were taken to the palace. Others tried to make themselves ugly by scarring their faces or cutting off their hair. Some even attempted suicide rather than submit to life as a consort. But for every woman who resisted, there were many more who saw becoming a consort as their best chance at a better life. In a society where women had few opportunities, the chance to live in luxury and potentially wield great power was incredibly alluring. It's a sad commentary on the limited options available to women in imperial China. Now, you might be wondering, how did this all end? Well, like many aspects of imperial China, it went out with a whimper rather than a bang. As China began to modernize in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the practice of consort kidnapping gradually fell out of favor. The last emperor of China, Puyi, still had concubines, but they were chosen from noble families rather than kidnapped from the general population. But even though the practice has ended, its effects linger on. The objectification and commodification of women that it represented didn't disappear overnight. In many ways, we're still grappling with its legacy today. So the next time you're watching a historical drama set in imperial China, and you see all those beautifully dressed concubines lounging around the palace, remember the dark reality behind the glamour. Those women weren't there by choice. They were victims of a system that saw them as nothing more than property, to be taken and used at will. It's a sobering reminder of how far we've come, but also of how far we still have to go in the fight for true equality. Because let's face it, folks, in a world where human trafficking still exists, are we really that far removed from the days of consort kidnapping? It's something to think about, isn't it? And with that cheery thought, I'll leave you to ponder the complexities of human nature and the endless capacity for both cruelty and resilience that our species seems to possess. Until next time, keep your wits about you, and maybe think twice before wishing you were born a princess. Sometimes, a simple life is the best life after all.